Getting in shape has always been a part of the game of football, but to what extent was it in 1923? Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com joins us to tell us about conditioning in 1923 season. It's all coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Before we get into our episode today, let's take the time to drill that football right into the like and subscribe button on your console so you know exactly when the notifications come up of the latest releases of Pigskin Dispatch podcast for some more great football history. Now on to our episode. Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to another Tuesday. It's FootballArchaeology.com day. And Timothy Brown, the founder of that fine site, is with us once again to tell us about some great football history. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darren. Good to see you again. It's going to be an opportunity for me to whip you into shape a little bit, buddy.
Whip me into shape. All right. Well, I need it because it's been a long, hard summer and got to get ready for these holidays coming up. So you have of course, you're segueing into a conditioning piece that you wrote a little while back. How conditioning took place in 1923. So 102 years ago, almost 103 years ago now.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about this?
Yeah. So this article is based off of what was called the Wilson Athletic Library. I think, most people who are into old time football stuff anyways are familiar with Spalding's library of publications that started, back in the 1880s, maybe for sure 1890s they were doing them. And then some other people, took them over and everything. But so Wilson developed a comparable line that, to my knowledge, they sold them. There's a price tag on these things, but in 23 they introduced a series of them, and so I've got like 6 or 7 of them. That there's like 6 or 7 football ones, and I've got all but one, and so they're just kind of fun. So the one on that they basically say it's on conditioning was written by Potsy Clark, who played at Illinois, was the coach of Kansas at the time, and then ended up he was the head coach of the Lions. He coached a number of places, and then the other guy was John Griffith, who was the commissioner of the Big Ten, who had coached in his day. So these are two knowledgeable people, and kind of in the midst of big time athletics, and so it's just funny to see what they thought and kind of their attitude towards things. So one of the great things is just that they basically would say, or did say, not to drink water close to or during practice, right? That whole water discipline thing, we've talked about it before, but, just a fascinating thing that, somehow people develop this belief not to drink water and that was the best thing. And, it's like the old thing about, don't eat before you go swimming, that same kind of thing. It's like, it's not something you really should be, worrying about. But in the case of water, depriving yourself of water, depriving your team of water, put all kinds of people in danger, and especially given the gear that they wore at the time. Everything was cotton or wool or leather, and it just got heavy, and you couldn't perspire properly. There's a reason we have wicking fabrics today, right? So maybe 100 years from now they'll look back at what we're doing and say, well, those guys were
Yeah,
a
why
little
were they
nutty.
drinking water?
Yeah. Water. But anyways, but then along that was a lot of, so what he called, or what they called, conditioning oftentimes just involved just general, how do you administer a team? How do you work them out? How do you plan your practice schedule? Because they end up spending a fair amount of time talking about things like, um, you know, not that players really didn't need to condition during the summer, right? kind of the ideal thing in their minds was if they're a farm boy who, for sure was going to be working, doing good outdoor labor, but otherwise, if you could be a lifeguard, a camp counselor, um, you know, maybe work construction, anything to be outside physically active, that was going to do a whole lot more good than any kind of conditioning program, because that's what training camp was for. And if you think even of like baseball training camp, those things, I remember when they lasted like 6 weeks. I think they're a little bit shorter now, but um, you know, nobody worked out, nobody stayed in shape. So camp was the time to get in shape. And so that, this whole book, kind of follows that philosophy. Um,
But they
and
would have had some good support at that time too, because Red Grange would have been a college student at that time, and he became the Wheaton Iceman because he carried
yeah,
those giant ice blocks up there, and that's what he claimed made him so strong and good at football.
yeah. Well, and there is, I know I grew up more in a city environment, and so sometimes we'd go wrestle, these smaller towns, and we always talked about, farm boys strong,
Mm-hmm.
these guys, these wrestlers, they may not have been in the workroom a whole lot, but you know, they were pretty strong kids. Anyways, but that was kind of the mentality. And so the other thing that they used to talk about a lot about was that you didn't want your athletes to get stale. So there was this balance of working them hard, but not overworking them, because if you overwork them, then they get stale. And that's like the worst thing that can happen. you know, and I mean, I guess for sure there's some kind of truth to it. We now to some level know how to, train to peak, though I think that's not so much the case in football, right? As it may be in track or, something like that. But um, anyways, this whole notion of being stale. And then if you're a coach, the best way to know whether you're overworking your kids or not is if is depending on how much they complain. You know, so you want them to complain, especially the lazier ones, right? But when the kids who love to work start complaining, then oh man, you've gone too far, right? So, anyways, there's just the whole volume is just it's maybe I don't know 40 pages or something like that, but it's just filled with nuggets like that. And
It's kind of interesting though, if you really think about what's going on, lately in football. Of course, the hydration thing probably really came to fruition probably in the early '90s. I'm guessing if I remember correctly, because I remember back when I was in high school, it was still the same. You don't drink water during practice. Water's for after practice. And the other thing is with professional sports, I know there's a lot of claims, especially in NFL, that since they do not have very many padded practices anymore, that they're become soft, and that's why there's poor tackling and poor hitting, and because they just avoid contact during practice, they avoid it during games. So
yeah,
kind of interesting the dichotomy here.
yeah. Now, I mean, in my mind, the water thing changed in the '60s when Gatorade came out. That was the high water mark of the water discipline. Now, I'm sure, and especially, depending on high schools and things like that, sometimes a word didn't get out, but like,
It,
even,
it, it
I,
didn't make it to Erie, Pennsylvania. I can tell you that.
while I was out there in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, I can tell you that. um, yeah. So, yeah, it's just one of those things. I mean, I remember like in college, you could drink water, all the water you wanted during practice. I mean, as long as you weren't in a drill or something. And certainly and then in games and after practice, Gatorade was available. So and that was just a budget thing. you know. So
I can remember like basketball practices with the drinking fountains right there in the gym, right where you're running. And the coach would be saying, "Oh, you guys want that drink? Run a couple more sprints. Let's go." You'd have
yeah,
to run sprints until somebody would sink like three free throws in a row, and then you could end practice. But yeah, it's
yeah.
horrible.
Well, and the other thing that's different too is just the in-season weight training. That I mean, back in the day, a lot of places just high school, small colleges just didn't have the facilities. If they had a universal gym, that was a big deal. And,
Mhm.
now even small colleges has some really beautiful facilities, for weight training and everything else, every other form of training. So it's kind of become a bit of an arms race, uh, though I think for smaller colleges, a lot of times the facilities are built as, there's going to be varsity facilities, but by and large, they're for the student body overall. They're not as targeted to the varsity athletes.
Yeah, I was shocked. My daughter goes to a Division two college here near Gannon University, and Gannon, I go by it all the time. It's right here in town, but I didn't realize they have this one building which I thought was they call their rec center, and we went in there. I thought it was just a gymnasium. You go in there, they have half of a football field in this brick building. They're practicing in there. They have a full outdoor stadium, but just I couldn't believe this little school has a facility like
Yeah,
that, which is pretty nice.
yeah, and well, I mean, I mean, the beauty of it is you can use it for a lot of things. I mean, the whole development of artificial turf, allows any number of teams to play on that turf, whether it's indoors or outdoors, and so those things tend to see a fair amount of use. Even like intramural soccer or lacrosse or whatever. They can do something like that. Indoors during the winter because I heard it snows in the area every once in a while.
Yeah, it's an occasional thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's for sure. Well, very interesting. Now this is taking us back 100 some years. It's grabbing an era of football that many of us today are unfamiliar with, and really shed some light on what some of the forefathers of football players and coaches were thinking and the thought process. And you do this a lot in your tidbits, and maybe you could share with the listeners how they can take in some of your tidbits and enjoy some of this.
sure. Just go to footballarchaeology.com. It's a Substack site, so either sign up, meaning if you subscribe, then you'll get an email every time that I publish a new one, and which tends to be a couple times a week, plus this podcast. And then otherwise, just bookmark it, or you can also follow me on Blue Sky, and because I do publish it on there every time or post it on there every time. So kind of whatever floats your boat.
All right. Well, we sure appreciate you sharing this with us today, and we'd love to talk to you again next week.
Very good. Thank you.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.